I really just want somebody who's going to aggressively fight for me in court. Is that too much to ask?
Filing my cases shouldn't be that difficult. There's got to be an easier way.
Nothing frustrates me more than having to wait for my attorney to call me back. I need them now.
What I really need from my law firm is someone who can provide my staff training so we actually can stay out of trouble.
When you have property management problems, we have your solutions. This is the Zona Law Group podcast with the experienced attorneys from Zona Law.
And good morning. I am Mark Zinman with Zona Law, and I am joined today by David Engelman, who is a local bankruptcy attorney, a partner in the law firm Engelman Berger, as well as the director for TEAP for Phoenix, which we're going to jump in today. So, David, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Mark. Thanks for having me.
So the viewers are going to be asking, what is TEAP Phoenix?
TEAP is just an acronym. It stands for Tenants Eviction Assistance Project.
And that came out this year, right?
It came out in July, and what it is, Mark, is the city of Phoenix saw a need for some legal assistance to the tenants of Phoenix who are facing eviction because of COVID. That the city of Phoenix already has a program to provide financial assistance. They saw a need for legal assistance, so they contacted Community Legal Services, and the city of Phoenix and Community Legal Services, offered C.A.R.E.S, entered into a contract. It's a short-term contract. It only runs through the end of this year, expires December 30th. But our job is at TEAP is to provide legal assistance to those Phoenix residents facing eviction because of COVID.
Yeah, and that's why we wanted you here. I think a lot of our managers are probably wondering what you're doing here. But, I mean, for me, I think it's critical for both sides to understand the perspective. And I think you're in a unique position, especially considering you just got into this in June, right? This wasn't your area of practice before, right?
Not whatsoever. I've been practicing here for 45 years, and I come from a background of insolvency where the approach to getting things resolved is to work with other people and the other attorney and try to get things done. And so I'm kind of winding down in my career. I'm not actively practicing with the law firm anymore. And Community Legal Services called me up and asked if I would head up this project because I've done a lot of work for them over the years. And so I've hired 6 young lawyers. It's hard to find lawyers who, for a 6-month gig, but I found 6 lawyers. 5 of them just graduated law school, but our job is to try to help our clients stay in their homes and pay their rent.
Yeah, and we have cases together, and I think that's what, I mean, ultimately for the people viewing it, obviously, on the landlord side, that's all it comes down to, is paying the rent, obviously. And there's a lot to it on the resident side as well. So what was your initial take jumping into the landlord-tenant world, coming from the bankruptcy world?
Well, I'm just, all my life, I've been this optimist living in this glass bubble. So I figured, boy, this is a great job. So we have we have a triangle here. We have tenants who need to have a place to stay. We have landlords who want to get paid, and we have financial resources that are there to help tenants pay landlords. So
it should be an easy fix.
It should be an easy fix. I jump right in, try to reach out to everybody and bring everybody together, and it didn't quite go as as well as my rosy thoughts suggested.
I think the triangle is a good explanation of it, though, because you see the landlord-tenant, obviously, and this year there's been a lot of rental assistance that's been created to be available. I think it was over $100 million. I think there's some delays in getting that assistance out is kind of the issue from, at least that I'm hearing from my clients. But if the assistance could come out, the eviction issue would go away. It's just landlords need to get paid. There's no question on the mortgage side. They've got their loans, just like tenants have their bills. It's the same thing. So I'm assuming your strategy is not just to come in and delay whatever you can. I mean, it's to work with the residents, correct?
Totally. There are a couple basic premises. One is landlords need to be paid. And the landlords kind of are taking it in the shorts a little bit because they don't get quite the relief that tenants do. So, but landlords need to get paid, absolutely. And the moratorium laws, any of that stuff says that rent needs to be paid. It doesn't go away. The moratorium is to keep people in place and not on the streets, but it doesn't make the rent go away. So we've taken the position that we try to help you and keep you in your premises. It's really important for you to make as much an effort as you can to pay.
And I can tell you, the viewers, our clients, obviously are incredibly happy to hear that. I know you and I have had cases together. Obviously, I'm thinking of one recently, which for client confidences we won't go into, but you guys reached out. It was someone, we had a judgment, but because of the CDC, they couldn't be removed under the moratorium through the end of the year. But basically, we worked together to figure out what was reasonable for that tenant to be able to pay, that my client was happy to get those payments and kind of continue the occupancy on. And hopefully that occupancy will continue past the new year as well. So it's really mutually beneficial.
It is. And we were talking, Mark, just before we got on here about my observations of the relationship between landlord and tenants. And one of the things that I've noticed is there's a real lack of communication going both ways, from landlord to tenant and from tenant to landlord. And when we're in this pandemic, which is just an awful thing, I think we need to be thinking out of the box. And that means a lot more communication between landlord and tenant. Tenants, when they go and apply for their rental assistance, they need to keep their landlords informed of everything that goes on. I mean, it's not hard to imagine being a landlord waiting for the rental assistance and come through and not knowing what's going on.
And that's not the tenant's fault. A lot of time when when they apply, and it takes months for the government to do anything, but the parties need to be talking. Otherwise, it's when the communication fails, everything gets very agitated.
It is. And the landlords need to turn off the portal as a way of communicating, send out a nice email, talk to the tenants. They need to get past some of the habits that I've seen them get into. They need to start accepting partial payments. I've suggested to many a landlord council that we would sign a waiver in a heartbeat to
we've done that.
To accept payments. I don't see any reason why a landlord wouldn't do it, as long as they're protected, and our program certainly would offer that protection. And we do it selfishly because I don't want my clients to set aside, and we tell them to save the money if the landlord won't accept it, then they run the risk of spending it. I don't want that to happen. I want it to go to rent. So those are just some examples of how I think the system could work a little better. Landlords and tenants could work a little better with better communication and thinking out of the box to maybe get rid of some old habits that I think maybe stand in the way.
Oh yeah, there's no question about that. And I think the partial payment's a great one. I think the reason is, and we've talked about this a bunch ever since C.A.R.E.S started, is working with tenants, accepting partial payments. The problem is we're one of those states that obviously has a partial payment statute, so you can't accept a partial payment and proceed with an eviction. So I can just tell you, in the industry, it's always managers are taught, do not accept partial payments, don't accept partial payments, don't accept partial payments. And now this year comes and it's like, okay, work with your tenants, do partial payments. I think that what people just aren't realizing is you have, and actually a lot of our clients have done this already, is just make sure you have it documented. Once you go to the partial payment, the contemporaneous writing, what you're talking about, then you get the protection, right? You don't have to worry about the statute causing a problem. You get the money in. You just have a signed agreement saying, okay, this is the schedule. And from our side, that's why a lot of times I like having, you come into those cases because I can talk and have that discussion with you saying, okay, what can your tenant pay? What can we work out? And I do think there's a communication issue out, and that's probably why a lot of times there's butting heads when there doesn't necessarily need to be.
Right. I agree. And I think, part of it has to do on the landlord bar side to educate their clients about things like there are ways getting around the partial payment waiver issue, and it's statutory, as you just described. And so draft up a form, send it to you probably do this, and send it to your landlord clients with some educational piece and say, hey, start accepting payments.
Yeah. I mean, this year, the C.A.R.E.S out on March 27th. I think we had a podcast like 3 days after that, kind of advising clients what it was. I think even in that one, right off the bat, we're like, you need to be working with tenants. It's mutually beneficial. And that's what people don't realize. I know there's been a lot of negativity about evictions lately, and it's a sensitive subject. I get it. I'm in the weeds on it, but I understand politically it's a sensitive issue. But you have to work through those things, right? I mean, evictions are going to happen. They're just part of business because landlords can't have people living in their property without paying. Tenants have that obligation, but tenants also want a place to stay. So figuring out the solution to that, which is, I guess, what we do on a day-to-day basis, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's it's an educational piece and it's a communication piece. And like I said, I think just changing some behaviors, that have probably been ingrained for many years, not easy to do for any of us, but I think it would be helpful to, for there be some change in behaviors going forward until we get through this pandemic.
Yeah. So how's the program gone so far?
The program has gone very well. I think I would say we're very successful. We are, since we've been here since July and really got off the ground in August. Since August, there's major changes in how this all works. You experience and we experience. First, you have one state moratorium, then followed by another state moratorium extending it, and then you have the CDC moratorium. And then you have new CDC regulations modifying what some thought were the rules relating to the moratorium. So all of us are in this industry, landlords and tenants, as well as the respective counsel, are kind of just reshuffling the deck every couple weeks. And it's nobody's fault. I don't fault the government because they had to provide help in such rapid fashion, but it's kind of crazy. But so we're doing that, and the landlords are doing that, and we're getting through it. The only disappointment I would have is I would love to see more numbers come to our office because I'll sit on calls and at hearings, and I will help our clients, and we'll keep them in place while we try to work out payment arrangements with the landlords. And for every 2 clients that we have, there's another 15 to 20 that I hear their cases get called and they don't have any help and they don't have any guidance and they don't know what they're doing and they end up being evicted.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think that brings up 2 points I want to touch on. One, the rental assistance obviously has been slow, and we don't need to disagree over that or not. I think generally that it's been reported on. It's taken a while to get out the money. It's coming a little faster now. And obviously, if you can get out the money to the tenants or allow landlords to apply directly, that'll get rid of the eviction issue. But also, what is your take on, you said you've been on the calls. What's your take on the telephonic eviction so far?
well, first let me go back to the financial piece and tell you that I don't disagree with your analysis that the rental money has been slow. And in fact, we're in TEAP, we're very frustrated by that because we can help our clients only so far. You know, we can only do so much. It's really money, getting money, that really is the answer. And so actually what we have done just recently, we're in our third week of this, TEAP has partnered up with Wildfire, whom Wildfire is in charge. Well, they're the agency that contracted with the city of Phoenix to manage the distribution of these rental assistance funds, and it goes through various agencies. TEAP has entered in a relationship where we have one of our staff people doing all the applications for the aid. So we're doing our own applications to get people financed. So when somebody comes and hires TEAP, they will run them through the financial assistance program of Wildfire through the city of Phoenix C.A.R.E.S funds, but we'll do all the work. And some of
amazing.
Yeah, some of the issues has been really getting the documentation from tenants, and sometimes it's a struggle for tenants. Many tenants don't have it stored in their file system like your firm or my firm. it's much more difficult for them. So we're trying to get past that and trying to get more people with assistance as possible. So
if a landlord has you show up on one of their cases, theoretically they should actually be happy because there's potentially going to facilitate the funds coming in, correct?
We try to approach cases reasonably, so I think they should always be happy. But short of that's not, I've noticed that's not always the case with some other counsel. But just to be clear, if a client comes to us and they've previously applied for financial assistance through the city, we can't jump in and take over. We got to start from the beginning. So, but we're hoping that will we'll get more business. With knowing that we can provide this service.
That's great. And I know a lot of our clients have actually even helped the tenants filling out the forms, but it goes back to that communication thing. If the communication breaks down on either side, and I'm not going to blame landlords or tenants, it's just communication sometimes break down. And I think that's where the majority of the problems come, because then you can file your case, it then goes to the attorney. If there's communication, whether it's through counsel to the parties directly, I think that will help a lot across the board.
Yeah.
Which is...
No question. On my bankruptcy practice, all my career, if I did debtor work, most of it was probably creditor, but if I did a debtor work, one rule of thumb I would always tell my debtor clients: communicate with your creditor. Don't leave them in the dark. The worst thing they can have is not knowing what's going on. It's absolutely the same thing in the landlord-tenant relationship. Tenants need to communicate. Going back to if tenants have applied for financial assistance but haven't heard, tell your landlord you haven't heard. You're bugging them, but you haven't heard. Tell them something. Just don't leave them in the dark. That kind of little communication will go a long way, I think.
Yeah, and I think if I had my soapbox, and so as to say what, and I'll pitch the same question to you. For me, going to the other side would be to the tenants. If I had any advice to the tenants, which would be, always stay in communication. I don't care what is going on. If it's a job loss, contact them proactively to your landlord and say, hey, this is what's coming down the road. Let's do something. Or if you've already applied for assistance, same thing. What would your suggestion be to landlords then?
My suggestion would be to the owners of the properties or the people in charge of the property management companies running this from the top down to get out a directive to their staff to be open to these communications, to better communications with the tenants.
Yeah, and we definitely, through the podcast, suggest that as well. I think it's a good idea. Just open lines of communication avoids a lot of issues. So today I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on the elephant in the room. Obviously, there's a Republic article that came out today on the C.A.R.E.S Act, alleged violations, problems. Our perspective was, obviously, the federal government didn't notify anybody that there was federally backed mortgages, how that was done. I think that's different than the C.A.R.E.S, the CDC moratorium now. You look to the person, right? CDC moratorium says if the person qualifies, they're protected. Whereas the C.A.R.E.S, it was based on the mortgage, which never made sense to me, and nobody ever notified landlords. Did you deal with the C.A.R.E.S side at all? Or was that before TEAP and you got involved?
Well, when we first started, we opened up shop in July and August. We were just coming to the end of the C.A.R.E.S Act, I think, through July 23rd or 4th or something like that. So we're familiar with that. We got familiar with the fact can't charge, no late charges assessed during the period. The noticing issues that we saw a lot of 5-day notices under C.A.R.E.S property. So during that period, and still now, every time we open up a file, we have a website we run every property under to see whether it's under the C.A.R.E.S Act, whether it's a mortgage-based property, federally based mortgage. So we do that. So yeah, we've definitely come across it, and the article you were talking about is in the Republic this morning, and it alludes to a number of tenants who've been purportedly improperly evicted in violation of the C.A.R.E.S Act. And C.A.R.E.S has known about that for a while and has been looking into that and seeing if there's any assistance that can provide the tenants.
Yeah. How do you see the CDC? People have been following it, being aware of it now? Because I'm assuming that's what you're dealing with, the CDC moratorium at the end of the year.
Most of our work involves getting a CDC moratorium in a place. So yeah, we are quite aware with it. It is remarkable to me as I sit on these calls at the hearing, and that was the second part of your question. We'll go back to it. It's these court appearances on these eviction hearings. They're all telephonic. I am, to this date, surprised how many people go in these hearings unaware of the CDC moratorium and what it can do for them. It's a little surprising to me because it's the CDC moratorium and order is out there in the public pretty prominently, but
Almost everywhere you go, you would think you search the word Arizona tenant, CDC would show up.
right. But it's out there, and there are a lot of folks who aren't aware of it. But right now we're facing, we're starting to see challenges to the CDC orders, and it's a tricky it's a tricky rule because the challenge has to be based as I read the administrative orders of the Supreme Court, based upon evidence, and a lot of times the landlords aren't in a position to have any evidence because it's all within the head and not the files of the tenant. So,
I'm glad you said that, because for us, I mean, we filed a couple challenges on the CDC declaration where the tenant's saying they're protected, and we just think they haven't made, one of the requirements is they make partial payments to the best of their ability, right? And they haven't made a single payment since May. I'm like, 99% of the time, that's not the best of the ability, is to pay zero. And the courts want us to show documentation. All we have is the ledger, any rental assistance applications the tenants have. So that is kind of the difficulties that we have on our side. So I do appreciate you recognizing that. But yeah, you did touch on that, which I forgot to follow up. So what is your take? Because on telephonic, whether it should stay around or not? If you don't want to answer, you don't have to.
No, I have nothing to hide. The competing interests are being safe during the pandemic as the pandemic surges again, and I think we're going to see a significant surge over the next few
numbers
months,
are up right now,
for sure. So I know I don't want to be around a crowded courtroom inside, and I wouldn't want anybody else. On the other hand, there is clearly some disadvantages that I've experienced by being on the phone. Sometimes it's hard to hear. Sometimes the tenants don't understand very well, and it would be easier to explain in person as opposed to on the phone. And then sometimes, because everybody's human, sometimes the judges get a little irritated with the background noise and having to talk over people, and it's hard. It's just hard. It's just hard on everybody. I think that being in person would be much more desirable for everybody and much more effective for the tenants. But under the circumstances, I wouldn't rush to go back into having hearings in person.
Yeah, but what do you think about the fact that appearances by tenants has gone through the roof comparatively? I mean, almost a flip in terms of, I think now our percentages are probably above 80% of tenants are calling in to these court cases, where before it may have been the 20%. So they're appearing in more because maybe they don't have to take off work to go find a non-payment case, right? There's a benefit to that tenant on that.
That's a history that I'm not privy to.
Okay.
Until you just made me privy to it. So, as I said, I don't have any real career history in this practice of law, but that would be significant to me. That would be a significant benefit to the system to have more participation in these hearings. So that's something to consider before you change back to going back in person.
Great. So we'll wrap up. What are you foreseeing coming early 2021? The last question for you, in terms of either TEAP or just generally in the landlord-tenant world.
Well, TEAP is set to expire at the end of the year. There's talk about extending it for another 6 months, which I really hope that they do. I don't need a job, but I think for tenants' sake, they really need help. There was an article in the CNN put out an article yesterday And the headlines was the tsunami of evictions.
Yeah, I saw it. I would disagree for a long. I mean,
Well,
I have a lot of issues with that article, but yeah.
I didn't even read the article. I just saw the headline. But the reality is that all of these, the moratorium is, the CDC moratorium is staying evictions until the end of the year. Rent continues to accrue. And unless there's some financial assistance available come January 1st, what's going to happen?
I think it's a great point. That's what a lot of the tenant advocates, and I'll put it that way, is like, yes, we need a moratorium. Yes, we should push off evictions. And then the complaint to media is like, oh, we have a tsunami coming. Not realizing you can't stop evictions for 7 months and think they're not going to pick up. The obvious solution is rental assistance. If rental assistance kicked in immediately and everybody just had their bills paid come December, there would no be evictions on January 1. So there has to be some sort of solution to resolve the issue. So I appreciate that.
I would hope so. And one of the issues is if there are a number of people who've been on a moratorium for months, rent continues to accrue. Hopefully they're making some payments, but there are limits to the amount of financial assistance that's available. The city's $3,300.
Yeah.
And sometimes the rental arrearage is greater than that. So it isn't maybe just that the financial assistance is the answer, but it is clearly the answer. And I hope that folks in positions of power realize that and are doing something to provide assistance to the tenants, because frankly, that will help the whole system, landlords and tenants.
Yeah, and it comes back to that triangle. I think you said that perfectly. So, David, I truly appreciate you coming in here. Like, we've worked together previously. I mean, it's just an open line of communication, but I really do appreciate you coming out here today and giving our viewers some perspective as well.
Well, Mark, I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and it's a great experience, and I look forward to working with you more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Uh-huh.